good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're listening in from. Hi, I'm Caroline Hill. I'm editor of Legal IT Insider. I'm here with Doug Caddell, who's Global Chief Information Officer of Mayor Brown. As you can tell from your background, Doug. Hi, how are you?
Good, good.
Welcome.
How are you during your afternoon?
Do you know, it's the hottest day of the year, so I can't lie to you, Doug. It's with the windows shut and no fan on for audio. It's pretty toasty in here.
Well, I'm broadcasting with you today from Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the USA, and yesterday it hit just over 100 Fahrenheit. So,
Oh my God.
but we're in the high desert, so it's come to be.
I guess you have aircon, that miraculous thing called aircon.
Yes.
We definitely need to get some of that today. Thank you so much for joining me. It's lovely to see you. Love to talk to you. We're here to talk about how CIOs are rationalizing legal tech spend post COVID-19, amongst other things. I think it would be really useful to get you to talk a little bit about you and your background first of all, before we jump into the weeds, because you've got a degree in business and accounting, is that right?
Yes, my university degrees are both in accounting and also in computer information systems. So I sort of went both ways. Right. And I started off out of university in business because I wanted to get a good background in that I thought would apply to technology, and because that's why technology exists, to help enable our businesses. And so I went the accounting route and attained my certification as a CPA, or Chartered Accountant Equivalency, and was general manager for a couple distributor companies and other things, and then got into legal IT through an attorney, a governmental accounting office, an attorney general's office here in the state of Arizona. Not where I am now. It's actually, that state's actually next door. But then remember my professional services days as a timekeeper in accountancy firms, and sort of liked the environment, and then ended up in law firms as CIO, which I've been doing for the last 23 or so years. So as I look at, how should we be rationalizing spend, I sort of come with it with that sort of business background. And as law firm leaders, we have a fiduciary responsibility to spend wisely. And we always have that. COVID didn't bring that around. But it's especially true now in this, current environment of business uncertainty. But at the same time, we can't be short-sighted, and we must keep an eye on the future. So we need to look at things both tactically, what do we need to do today, and strategically. And often strategic objectives or strategic projects are the easy ones to defer. Whether they should be deferred or not is an interesting question. That's the question, I guess.
Yeah, I might bring you back to delve more into the strategic, how you get that balance. But so, what happened? So when COVID hit, what happened? Talk us through it. Was there an immediate brakes put on legal tech spend, or how would you describe, being there at the coalface?
There probably was a quick tap on the brakes, and I was actually in our London office the week it all sort of materialized. We had been in Asia before, and I was in our Hong Kong office at the end of January, when, put things in perspective from a timing perspective, there was one death in Wuhan at the end of January, and you think about the world now. But there was we definitely did a hard tap on the brakes, and needed to reassess what we were doing, because in March and going into April, no one knew what was going to happen. And when we got into April, our business went down. It sort of went, I'll say, sort of drove into a trench. And I'll add on to that in a second. So in April, sort of drove into a trench, but we didn't know as we were going through the trench if the other side of the trench was a cliff.
Yeah.
And luckily it wasn't so far. We sort of drove into a trench. Our realization rates went down at about 10% or so, but they've sort of stayed, level.
Yeah.
So we haven't taken the brake off spend. What we did was we looked at, and from an IT perspective, we looked at our project portfolio for 2020. And there's always projects that you want to do, because in some cases you've kicked the can down the road for a couple of years, and we really need to do this now. But there are projects always that you want to do, but there's a lot of them, or some of them, or it depends on your mix, can be put off to another year. So we took about probably about 15 projects and said, we're not going to do any work on them this year, and some of them were scheduled for the end of 2020. So it's a matter of just pushing them, 2 or 3 months, and we'll be taking them back up in the 2021 budget process, which we're getting ready to start. So we sort of tapped the brakes. Some things got pushed out. Other things was, it was like, okay, we really need to do this. We need to keep our eye on the future. We're not going to just, stop and as I said before, we have a fiduciary responsibility to spend wisely. And sometimes that means stop, and other times it means, no, we really need to do this.
Presumably that's the real challenge. I mean, I'll come on to some specifics about what you prioritize, but I mean, presumably it's a massive challenge in terms of you obviously want to you've got that fiduciary responsibility, but you've got your strategic imperatives. You want to deliver on strategy. So is it presumably it's been pretty difficult in terms of how do you find the balance? How do you ensure you're finding the balance between those two things to make sure you're not you're respecting the financial position, but you're also driving forward, which I see it's hugely important, not to kind of come to a halt at the moment. So how do you find that balance?
Well, the way we're looking at it is, again, we put off some projects, but not all of them. So we're still doing a lot of work and making progress. We're not just doing break fix. But from a firm perspective, we would need to reassess the future. What does the future look like, and what does the workplace of the future look like? And probably about 60 days ago, maybe a little less, our managing partner created a task force of to look at workplace of the future. What is it? Because it isn't going to be on, pick the date you want, October 1st, January 1 of next year, whatever it is. It's not going to be everybody marches back in the office. And I was reading an article about clothing, business clothing in the UK. I was reading it this morning. It came out on The Lawyer or something, and it was talking about, the clothing companies with suits and stuff are having problems because everybody's dressing more casual. And, it's what is the question was, what is your business dress at home when you work from home? I put on a sort of a collared golf shirt I dressed up for this.
I normally wear a shirt for these interviews, but it's just too hot.
But if you take that perspective and what is the workplace of the future? We're not going to all march back into the office and put on suits. I mean, we may a couple days a week, but a couple days a week we maybe work from home. And so we have to, look at what is the workplace of the future. What is it in relation to what our clients want it to be, and what our lawyers and fee earners and business services staff want it to be, because life has now changed. So the office is no longer in the office. And so we're looking at that from a firm perspective. We're looking at it from a real estate perspective, from a staffing perspective. I have a meeting on 5 August of that task force where the discussion for the hour is strictly technology.
Right.
What technology is available to help facilitate the workplace of the future?
Yeah.
And what changes that are envisioned for the workplace of the future does technology need to step up to enable? So that's really our thinking of, we have project lists that some got pushed over to 2021. We'll resurrect probably 80% of those. Some of them, as we reassess them, it may not make a difference, may not be important. But we're also looking now into what is the workplace of the future, and how do we do things like, such as collaboration is bigger. We're no longer, walking down the office to talk to somebody. We're all distributed, and, products like Microsoft Teams and stuff, where 10 months ago would have been maybe a nice to have kind of thing and sort of future vision, but now they're reality.
So your task force, so that's a mixture, is it? So it's partners, is it from across the firm and tech? Who roughly, obviously, without having to name names, who makes up the task force?
There's about 15 or so individuals from across our global span.
Yeah.
Most of those are partners. A couple are office managing partners. Others are not. There's a variety of business areas they come from.
Yeah.
Key business services staff like myself as CIO, our chief marketing officer, our chief human resources officer. There's there's probably four or five non-lawyers in it, but the others are partners who are drawn from a variety of things. So there's a variety of input.
It's great to have technology discussed at that senior level, at that cross-firm level as well. So I think quite often it's very siloed, isn't it? In terms of the approach, it's great to see a real sort of strategic approach coming through, which something that I haven't seen an awful lot of, being completely honest with you.
Yeah, so as we look at that, obviously some things pop out in, I think, everybody's mind who's on this call, as far as, what happened when we went work from home.
Yeah.
Um, our big challenge was license counts. So we spend about a week upping our license counts for various collaboration technologies and RSA tokens and things like that. But really, I think as a group, as we sit back and absorb what's happened, video collaboration is the big thing. Zoom has sort of zoomed to the forefront, pun intended. And then WebEx and other things, and then document collaboration. How do you work with secretaries and admin assistants and business services staff?
So tell me about video conferencing. So I think I'm going to I really want to revisit this workplace of the future and perhaps revisit real estate. But so tell me about, so video conferencing, I know, is one of the areas that's become for you a nice to have, rather, it used to be a nice to have, and now it's a necessity. Is that right? So tell me about how, have you grouped around Zoom? How have you managed that?
Yeah, we've been doing video conferencing for years, mostly in the office, and especially across our global footprint. But we've done WebEx for a number of years, but we had a new version of WebEx that was planned to be rolled out, in April type timeframe, and all of a sudden, okay, we need to roll this out next week.
Okay.
So we rolled it out next week, and that's our primary platform.
Okay.
But we use Zoom and a little bit of Teams. We want to use Teams more. But an example is that once a month, our chairman has a partner meeting, global partner meeting, and it's more of a broadcast and presentation rather than a lot of back and forth. But it was always done through in-office video conferencing. He would get in one of the conference rooms, and we used our video conferencing services to record it, but broadcast it live. Now they're all done, and within like a 3-week time period, it's switched over to, we do it by WebEx.
Right.
And we have 400, 600 people on a WebEx stream. And whatever brand you use, it doesn't really matter. It's sort of interesting how that changed. But a big challenge will be, as we look at workplace of the future, will be, how does work occur? And what I mean by that is, what is the workflow? I think as we look, there's workflow technologies out there that used to be, we use them here and we use them there. But with people, whether to be an associate and partners and business staff who you need to circle back with and communicate with, it's not just putting it into the inter-office envelope and sending it to somebody's desk. It's, where did it go? What's it doing? And things like that. So I think workflow technologies are going to become more important in the next year or two.
I agree. So that's that's what I've seen. Obviously you'd rely on walking into somebody's office and being able to communicate. And now I've seen this almost panic in some quarters where people are trying to work out how they track. If they don't have sufficient workflow, legal project management infrastructure, they can't work out, so particularly with back office, who's doing what, right? Like where the work is in the process and what the kind of volume of work is and that kind of thing. Are you presumably focusing quite heavily on that side of things?
Yeah, and one thing that popped up is, putting workflow aside for a second, but just how does work get done?
Right.
So this all broke, say the first, second week in March across the UK, US. And, excuse me. And one of the things that occurs every month in every law firm is billing.
Yeah.
And the thing that occurs before bills are sent out to the clients is the pre-bills, where the lawyers look at the bills and make sure they're right and you're not insulting the client or whatever. And that at this firm has always been manual, paper intensive. Billing clerks, get in our centralized location. This particular thing occurs in Chicago, and there's tables that are set out and paper is produced. And then the paper, finds its way to the lawyers through interoffice mail or whatever. And then the lawyers mark up the pre-bills and the bills get billed. And all of a sudden, everybody was home. The lawyer and the business and the billing.
Yeah.
And so how do you do that? So one of the first things we had to assess and change was how to do pre-bills. Because nobody was in the office. Well, 2 or 3 people maybe. And so we had to work with the finance department, the accounting department, the IT department to redesign. We use Adderant, so we were taking Adderant feeds, redesign how to do electronic pre-bills. And we also had to get physical computer hardware to the billing clerks, to about a dozen billing clerks who may have had a PC at home, may have not had a printer, may have not. So there's that component too. Yeah. And then get the bills, pre-bills electronically sent to the lawyers. And you know what? It worked. And I
love the fact that people are surprised by this, but yeah.
Yeah. And because it's been put off for years and years, but we're never go back. Yeah.
So is the process paperless now? Would you describe it as paperless?
Pretty close, yeah. Yeah, pretty close. Or at least it's not dependent upon paper, and it's not dependent upon somebody being in the physical office.
I suppose because you've got the people who've got the kit at home, so that they're able, then nobody has to go into the office. And presumably I know that's something that's been on a lot of people's minds. So that was accelerated. That was something sort of, obviously people have thought about this for a long time, but presumably that was another thing that was accelerated.
And they probably would have been thinking about it for a long, long time in the future, because it was one of those immovable objects, because people were thinking it wouldn't work. It's just like our work from home policies, right. As in many organizations, we're pretty much, if you think back, designed to inhibit people working from home.
Yeah.
Because nobody thought it would work. Everybody thought if somebody was home, they would be doing, watching Netflix or something, and right. not. And it's universally accepted now at Mayor Brown, whatever country you're in, that work from home works.
Yes. And I mean, that's been the global realization. And that actually I won't take you down this rabbit hole, but just as a quick observation, it's fantastic from an HR perspective to not be limited by real estate, right? So in terms of your ability to hire people and to onboard people, it's just been, but so when there have been other things that I know that you've had to address, that a lot of firms have had to address. So for example, you've taken a new approach to document scanning. Is that right? That's another issue that you've had to bring on iOS scanning, is that right?
Genius Scan. We've taken a baby step.
Okay.
But we quickly, probably about 4 weeks into the work from home situation, we realized that lawyers need to be able to scan documents, and business service staff too. And they didn't really typically have a way to do that. So we did a quick survey and review of what was out there, and came across an mobile app that you can use on your mobile phone or iPad or whatever, and do some quick document scans, at least, so you didn't have to type in everything from scratch. Or you might need to send it. You just may need to send it to somebody. So that was a big deal.
And what about further digital? Because we did a survey, Legal IT Insider did a survey about what people would have done differently if they'd had a crystal ball in the run up to COVID, and what they were looking at now. And actually hardware was one of the big ones, in terms of they would have given more people laptops, and they would have given them monitors, and and they would have set up their home office and all this kind of stuff. But there's a lot of focus inevitably on digitization, so e-signatures and that kind of thing. So is that something that you've also had to focus on in terms of, given that we now know that this is here to stay, presumably that's a huge area of focus in terms of continuing that paperless journey?
Yeah, that's part of the work from, Workplace of the Future review we're
Right.
doing.
Yeah.
We've used, I had the name and I just forgot it. Esignature.
DocuSign.
DocuSign, thank you.
Yeah.
When you were talking, it was in my head and then it
No, don't
disappeared.
worry.
We've used DocuSign for a number of years,
Okay.
but we did see a greater uptick
Right.
because people didn't need to do it before.
Yeah.
But we're also looking at, what do we need? What else is going to change? And
Yeah.
especially as we rationalize time and money and try to make that balance, and still thinking of the future and not just thinking of the immediate future. I think
Yeah.
one of the things that will change because of COVID is everybody's gone work from home. Everybody has implemented business continuity in some form or fashion.
Right.
And just as clients and prospective clients have for years, asked us about our security and
Yeah.
say ISO 27001, are you certified in that area? I think the business continuity certifications like ISO 22301 are going to become more prevalent and more important, and people are going to be asking for it. So we've thought about it for 2 years or so, and
Yeah.
it was always it's nice, but is there a real driving reason to spend money and time and money on doing that?
Yeah.
And that was back in the old days, like 6 months ago. So as of yesterday, we kicked off a project to attain our ISO 22301 cert by the end of the year, and we should be in good place to do. We have a global business continuity manager, and she's been in that business for years. So she joined us about 3 years ago. So I think we're probably in a good place. The interesting part will be the gap analysis to see what we're missing. But I think that's a key thing. How CIOs ought to be rationalizing their tech spend. It's thinking of the future a little bit too. And okay, we're going to be spending some money on the business continuity cert where we've put other things off in 2020. But this is one of those things that, come January 1 or in that time frame when prospective clients are asking for, well, what do you do for business continuity? Well, we can have the answer. And it sort of directly impacts revenue.
Are they already asking for ISO in RFPs and things? Are you seeing that much more?
We've seen a couple, but one or two, including the Crown services in the UK. So it's a big one. But I think come this next round of people asking, say, I'm just going to pick January 1. Come January, we're going to see it more and more. So we want to be ahead of the curve.
It makes a lot of sense, particularly with there's obviously so many vulnerabilities with people working from home. If people don't have their processes right in terms of, for example, printing and what happens, with the policies around that. So that's exciting and hot off the press.
Mention something real quick. I know we're getting close to time.
No, that's okay, because I want to come on to talk a little bit about staffing in a minute. But yes, go.
At home and things like that. For years, clients have been saying, we don't want you to do this, we don't want you to do that, and we sort of said, with respect to security, and we've always pretty much all nodded and stuff, because something to say printing at home. And I'm just pulling that you pulled it out of the air.
Well, no, it's one of the big things, big key issues.
So, last year, it was an inconvenience, but where's the work of the future? If the office is no longer in the office, things as simple as printing become imperative.
There's a lot of firms that don't not allowing printing. That's an increasing trend that I'm seeing. That and their clients actually. There's one firm that was saying on a
Yeah.
webinar recently that their clients won't allow them, as a matter of course, to connect to a printer from the office computer at home. So I think because we're seeing much more demands from clients in terms of behaviours and policies.
Yeah, and I think that you know, 6 months ago, some things made sense, but 6 months
Yeah.
from now, with a new workplace, um, if you're saying your home office can be your office,
Mm,
you really need to reassess some of those things so that
yeah.
it can.
Yeah. So let's come back. So I want to talk with, I wish I had longer with you, Doug, but so staffing, so things are really changing in terms of the way fee earners are behaving. Obviously, they've had to become much more self-sufficient. They're doing much more of their own typing. That's changed expectations. This fits into your workflow of the future considerations about what that looks like, you know, in terms of staffing and in terms of what, you know, how you set fee earners to work up and whether they are self-sufficient, how they're supported. So that's another area of interest, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, all I can really say at this point is that that's part of the
Yeah.
workplace of the future review that's being done along with real estate. We had
Yes. Right.
our real global real estate vendor in at the prior meeting and talked about
Okay.
what they're seeing in firms and such, whether hoteling makes sense in some form or fashion, but staffing too, because you know, people have always said, well, my assistant needs to be right outside my door,
Yeah.
um, and he or she is not right outside that person's door anymore. They're
Yeah.
from home. Uh,
Yes.
so the historical perspectives, I guess the balloon of the historical perspectives has been popped, or
Yeah.
at least the air is shooting out from the bottom and it's going squirrely around the room.
So you can look at, so real estate, so presumably, do you think there'll be, I mean, I hear this from everybody, so it's no revelation that firms are going to be looking, do you think with immediate effect to downsize with their real estate, would that be a fair, how would you describe what you think it's going to look like in terms of real estate going
Yeah,
forward?
I don't see anything really immediate, and especially from the conversations we've had within that task force,
Right.
and really that's being driven by lease, lease arrangements and your lease agreements. If you're, if you're locked into a lease for the next 5 years, it doesn't really matter. What our real estate advisors said that, one thought is that people have been having are to, reduce, rebuild some of the existing floor footprint to maybe add
Mm,
more offices or things like that. But the comment was that it costs so much to gut and rebuild a floor or section of floor that you may gain 3 offices or workspaces, but you spent millions of
okay.
pounds to do that, and so
Right.
it just doesn't make sense. So I think we're going to see a long-term change, and I think it's going to be discussed now. It is being discussed now.
Yeah.
Whether it be intermediate, immediate things, it depends on. I think it depends on a lease agreement if you can sublet something.
Exactly. Yes, I guess it depends on where you are, and if and then you'll just have to make the most. And actually, someone made the interesting point to me that that with young lawyers, it's quite hard to properly, train them, etc.
Uh,
Although I do think I think that maybe have been an attitude perhaps at the beginning of. I think there's
I
nothing better than being in person in terms of getting
yeah
to
I,
know them. But
I
I feel like we're evolving and we're actually becoming like on camera online as we are. This is where business is getting done, and this is where training is getting done. And I think people are becoming much more comfortable with that and much less, thinking that things can only be done in person, like training or onboarding.
well, that's true. Thinking that they cannot only be done that way. I remember back when I was a young staff accountant at a university, and it was in an international CPA firm, and I was learning how to do financial stuff. And I still remember this day, one of the partners, Richard Stravelo, the name just popped back in my mind, said, well, because I was in his office, he said, well, come around here. And I came around to the back of his desk, and he showed me, with pen and paper, and how things were done. It was, rather than trying to explain it. So
Yeah.
I do relate to the issue about training, and
Mm.
I think it will be both. So, and that's why it won't be work from home, say, 5 days a week. It will be maybe 2 or 3, and there will be some back and forth. And
yeah, with so many topics we haven't talked about cloud, but we've run out of time. Hopefully there'll be other opportunities to have these kind of conversations. But I'm really grateful for you coming on and talking to me today.
thanks. I'll leave everybody with one quick
Yeah.
comment, and that
Okay.
is, think strategically,
Okay.
but execute tactically.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Doug.
All right.
Speak to you
Cheers.
soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.